the scale of mind control to which the global human population is constantly subjected. In all its various forms, it's a tidal wave of daily instructions, daily encouragement, daily subliminal messages to hijack the human mind and the human perception of everything. And when you use that term, mind control, what comes to mind for many is movies like the Manchurian Candidate, where someone is mind controlled to be an assassin or something. Uh, and my goodness me, those people exist on a very large scale, to say the least. But mind control is much more than that. It is simply about persuading people that the perception the manipulators want is the one they should believe in. It's like putting people in a bubble, a bit like this image, where only the perceptions of the bubble are accepted and believed in by the target population, the target individual. And everything outside of that is not part of the perception process. And therefore, if you look at it on that basis, mind control is simply getting people to believe what the mind controllers want them to believe. That's it. And therefore, what comes from belief, what comes from perception? Behavior. What people will do, what they won't do, what they'll accept, what they won't accept, what they'll support, what they won't support. And therefore, on that basis, the mainstream media, when it tells you things that are not true, which is most of the time, is a mind control operation. When you look at the education system, where children from the earliest age are put into this conveyor belt of perception, downloaded manipulation of perception, they are told day after day, month after month, year after year of their entire formative years, the system's version of everything, at the exclusion of so much that would put that system version in a new light, a very questioning one. And so the education system is also mind control. It's perception control. It's giving you the state's version of what the state wants you to believe. And this whole thing about fake news, which is nothing more than an attack on the alternative media, is a protection mechanism for the mind control. Because if you are trying to develop and install perceptions of everything in the population, then you need to control as much as you can the sources of information that population is receiving. If it gets other information, putting the same subjects or situations in a different light, looking at it in a different way, then your perception download comes under question, because people see that there is actually another way of seeing it. And so we have this very topical area now, and ever gathering so, called censorship, which can be seen in this light and from this perspective. Censorship is simply blocking information that would challenge that which is desired that the population believe without question. And in that way, journalists, scientists, doctors, the whole shebang, politicians, are actually mind controllers, because what they're doing is giving a version of events, a version of everything at the exclusion of other possibility, to bring about a perception of the population that suits the system. And the vast, overwhelming majority of those people, journalists, scientists, doctors, politicians, and so on, will have no idea whatsoever that that's what they're doing. Some politicians obviously will be more aware, and one or two journalists will be more aware, but most of them are not. They're just doing what the system insists that they do, and thus playing their part in this whole perception manipulation, while themselves being perceptually manipulated. They have a system within the deep government military mind control projects, which do produce people like Manchurian candidates, where they program people to become programmers of other people. And so the number of programmers increases as people are programmed to program. I've met them. And in terms of the general population, that is what's going on. Journalists who give people a false view of information and the world, scientists a false view of reality and possibility, doctors a false view of how you can treat illness, i.e. whatever Big Pharma tells them. All these things, politicians who want to get you to believe their version of events for their own interests, these are all programmed people programming other people. Like I say, there will be some key ones who are absolutely knowingly doing it, but the vast majority are not. They're just caught in the web. And when you look at these deep government military mind control programs, way out of the public eye almost all the time, and I've studied these, like I say, in great depth over the years, both sides of the Atlantic. When you see how they work, you can then see how the same patterns, the same methods are actually played out on the general population. One of the most famous, in fact, the most famous mind control project that has come to light was in the United States, was known as MK Ultra. Still going, just under other names, but MK Ultra came to light in the public arena when it was revealed how this project, which was vast, in institutions, universities, psychiatric operations in the United States and Canada, that was actually experimenting on the minds of their targets and their laboratory rats, in other words, called human beings. They were experimenting on how to completely take over someone's mind, how to wipe their mind of what was there before, memories that were there before. One woman in MK Ultra had to be taught afterwards how to go to the toilet again. So wiped had her mind been by these crazies, these insane people that are running our world. And a lot of the MK Ultra operation was run by Nazis from Nazi Germany, who at the end of the war, through something called Operation Paperclip, were helped to escape out of Germany, and they ended up in the United States. They were mind controllers, they were genetic manipulators, they were engineers. It's these Nazi engineers and scientists that started NASA. They created it. And one of them, a guy called Werner von Braun, who was a Nazi party member, a member of the SS, who was the scientist engineer that developed the V2 rockets that were dropping on London during the Second World War. He, when he was moved to America under Operation Paperclip, was the man who developed the Saturn V booster rockets for the Apollo moon program. This group of Nazis that were allowed to escape to the United States, and of course some to South America, included those people that were focused on mind control, and it was they that created MK Ultra, and one of them was Joseph Mengele, the angel of death in the concentration camps, who operated in the United States after the war under the name Dr. Green. And he was massively, massively central and part of MK Ultra. And he operated in South America as well. And I've spoken over the years to many people who came out of MK Ultra and its elite project offshoot known as Project Monarch. And most of them didn't come out because they were killed or their minds were completely broken, deleted. But those I've spoken to have told a very compellingly common and multiply supporting account of MK Ultra Project Monarch and what happened to them. And this is how this kind of mind control works. And it will become very relevant to the way it's done on a mass scale in a minute. MK Ultra was founded on a technique that they call trauma-based mind control. This means that they traumatize people from the earliest age. They want them as a young child before the brain is fully formed. And they subject them to horrors. It could be watching a child sacrificed, watching an animal sacrificed. It could be making them participate in stuff like that. It could be finding what terrifies them more than anything, say a fear of snakes, a fear of spiders, and then putting them in an enclosed space with exactly what they are terrified of. And what the mind does to protect itself is it walls off those memories of extreme trauma. It creates like a honeycomb, symbolically, in the mind, of closed compartments behind which that memory is held. So the conscious mind is not constantly reliving it. This is seen when people have a terrible road accident and they can never remember the actual impact and the aftermath because the mind has compartmentalized it and put a firewall around it, if you like. And what these mind manipulators then do is exploit this. It's called dissociative identity disorder, used to be called multiple personality disorder. And they program these compartments, which in their mind control parlance they call alters, as in altered states of awareness, with other, quote, personalities and instructions. And so what they do with these people is create what they call a front altar. That's the conscious mind most of the time. It's the personality that people who interact with them will believe is them. But in the subconscious are all these self-contained compartments called altars, which are given instructions, behavior instructions, perception instructions, and they stay there, not imposing and impacting upon what the person does or thinks until particular triggers are given. That's what they call them, triggers. It could be a trigger word, a trigger phrase, a trigger sound, even a trigger image. And once that is given, that back altar, as they call them, then becomes the front altar, and the front altar goes into the subconscious. Now, the back altar as the front altar is dictating that person's perception and dictating that person's actions. And this is used for very famous people to sexually and violently abuse children with a back altar. And then the back altar is pushed back into the subconscious. The front altar then becomes the conscious mind again. The front altar has no memory whatsoever of that abuse. And this is how these people are protected. They can be used for assassination, where someone is going about their business. Then the trigger is given. The program to assassinate altar becomes the front altar, and they play out the assassination. Look at some of these people. I mean, the classic is Sirhan, who's still in jail for killing Bobby Kennedy, JFK's brother. When you look at the background and the evidence, it's quite demonstrable that he was under mind control and didn't actually, it's another story, another day, didn't actually kill him. Someone else did. But he was there in the wrong place at the wrong time, so he could be convicted by it. And when you look at his background, and I have many years ago in detail, on what happened that night, and you look at the psychiatric reports about him, it's clearly the case that he was under mind control, a classic, if you like, Manchurian Candidate program. You can use these same techniques to program someone to carry out a terrorist attack. And over and over and over again, you see people involved, particularly in America, in mass shootings, which of course traumatize the population, among many other things, who are clearly under forms of mind control and were triggered to do it when you look at the background evidence. So when you look at these possibilities and you look at world events, you can start to see another possibility of why people did and do what they do in terms of these assassinations and these terrorist attacks. And presidents and other various leaders of society are also put under forms of mind control and perception control. They don't want any surprises, the cabal that's behind all this. They want to be able to control everything without any surprises that make things blow up in their face. So they want to control through mind manipulation all the different players as much as they can. That doesn't mean it applies to everybody, but it applies to far more than people would even begin to believe. I mean, I look at some of these names in Silicon Valley, and when I observe them, I see classic traits of mind control. And when you then play this out, this, if you like, individual perception installation, you play that out across the general population, you see, like I said earlier, the same techniques happening all the time. See, one of the key reasons they use trauma, there are many reasons, creating the altars for a start, but one of the other key reasons is that when people are in a state of trauma, they become far more suggestible. They are open to their perceptions being fundamentally influenced when they're in a state of trauma. So when you look at 9/11, when you look at terrorist attacks, assassinations, wars, and all these other trauma creating, trauma triggering events and happenings, then at that time, the population in general, in its state of trauma in reacting to what's going on, becomes more suggestible to what the politicians and the authorities say must happen because of what has gone on, what has caused the trauma. It's happening all the time if you come from this perspective of appreciating how it works. Then you look at religion. What is religion? It's mind control. It is, as I've said for many years, the greatest form of mind control ever invented. Look at how people's lives, people's perceptions, thus their lives, are completely controlled by their religious belief. Whether it's Christianity in its extreme forms, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Islam, whether it's Hinduism, you see lives completely controlled from cradle to grave by an unyielding, unquestioning belief in religion, whichever religion they are focused upon. And it's based on what? It's based on perception control completely. Everything I need to know is between the covers of this book. Anything outside of it can't be true. I mean, it's a head shaker, really. But it's also implanted by fear of not doing what the God wants, whatever it is, and by guilt of not doing what the God wants. And you look at something like Roman Catholicism, one of the world's greatest manipulators of guilt and fear. So everywhere you look, there is this war on human perception, because from perception comes everything. You can't control billions of people physically. You've got to do it by controlling their perceptions so that they will willingly do what you want them to do and what suits your agenda of mass human control. And there are ever-gathering methods of mind and perception control, and now increasingly they are technological. Everything in our reality is a frequency. Everything. Thoughts are frequencies. Emotions are frequencies. And different emotions, whether it's joy or whether it's depression, are different frequencies. The human brain works in a certain frequency band and processes information in a certain frequency band. Therefore, if you can broadcast frequencies and information in those frequencies within the frequency band that the human mind interacts with reality, then you can completely scramble them or implant thoughts and perceptions that people think are their own. You know, different emotions like a violent protest. That is a frequency. People getting mass agitated, mass in mass states of fear. These are all frequencies, and if you can broadcast frequencies um, in a community or in an area, those that pick up those frequencies, it's what they call entrainment, where the external frequency starts making the brain entrain with it, lock into it, and therefore respond to it. You can create mass hysteria. You can create mass fear. This is a story about what happened in 1991 in the war against Iraq, the first one, the first Gulf War, if you like. It's a story talking about a revelation in 1991 of high-tech psychological warfare arriving in the Middle East. It describes a US psychological operation, PSYOPs, tactic, directed against Iraqi troops in Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. The maneuver, it says, consisted of a system in which subliminal, below threshold, you can't hear it, you're not aware of it, but it's going in the subconscious, in which subliminal mind-altering technology was carried on standard radio frequency broadcasts. The US PSYOPs team set up its own portable FM transmitter and transmitted a sophisticated electronic system to speak directly to the mind of the listener, to alter and entrain his brainwaves, to manipulate his brain's EEG patterns, and artificially implant negative emotional states, feelings of fear, anxiety, despair, and hopelessness. And this subliminal system doesn't, it says, just tell a person to feel an emotion. It makes them feel it. It implants that emotion in their minds because they're broadcasting the frequency of that emotion, which gets the body to manifest that emotion. Instead of the emotion coming from, if you like, within the person's mind and triggering that reaction, instead it's externally done and triggers the same reaction. And they did this to Iraqi troops. They broadcast this stuff to Iraqi troops. And what happened? There was a mass surrender of Iraqi troops. It's called Project Solo, apparently. Now, are we so naive as to believe that's not being used on the general population to bring about reactions, responses, and behavior from the target population? Of course they are. And when you look, therefore, at this now gathering and fantastic already grid of transmitter towers, of Wi-Fi, of smart meters, the Tetra system, which is the emergency services communication system in Britain, and similar ones around the world. These are frequencies being broadcast into the environment. And when you research this deeply and in great detail over a long period of time, you find that these various forms of frequency transmission are not only impacting on brainwave activity and emotional states in the population. That's why people that live next to some of these towers get depression and many other psychological and physical traits as a result. But these transmitters are actually part of the same grid. They're talking to each other. All this smart technology is communicating with each other. Smart this, smart that, smart the other. And we've really got to start understanding and stop being naive and appreciate the scale on which human perception now, in all these multiple ways, is being targeted so that we think and therefore act the way that suits this global agenda of human control. Another aspect of this is drugs. Children today are the most drugged child population in human history. Psychological drugs, mind-changing drugs, Ritalin and all these others. And there was an article that's recently been produced by a journalist that I've known for a long time in California called John Rappaport. And it's a terrific expose of the scale of drug and mind manipulation in general, manipulation that's going on in the colleges of the United States. He reveals that 25% of college students in America have been treated for some type of mental or psychological disorder, or what is perceived to be that. And as a result, the drugs are handed out like confetti. Then the impact of the drugs on the psychology of the student, the behavior and perceptions of the student, then changes their perceptions and their behavior even more. And instead of the psychiatrists saying, well, that's the effect of the drug, they're giving another psychological name, another psychological illness to what the drugs are causing. And so the spiral goes on. And it's not just drugs that are used to mind manipulate students. There are many other techniques, but drugs are very central to much of it. And so we can now start to understand where this extraordinary, what I would perceive as insanity, is going on in universities, with students becoming, not all of them, some of them are seeing through it, but I mean very large numbers, are becoming professional victims who need safe spaces where no one can say anything that might upset them, where speakers coming to universities are deplatformed, in other words, censored, stopped from speaking because they might say something that might upset someone. It's extraordinary the levels to which this is happening now under the ludicrous label of political correctness. Extraordinary. And what happens when you become a victim? What happens when you become what people are dubbing a snowflake? You look to authority to protect you from what you've been manipulated to fear and feel a victim of. And so you demand that Big Brother imposes itself even more to censor the free flow of information and to stop people doing anything of any significance that would in any way challenge this system of control. I mean, in Britain this week, we've had a theatre saying that it's going to issue trigger warnings, that something coming up in the play might upset people. And that's the point. I've mentioned it already. When they put people that, like in MK Ultra, under these forms of very extreme mind control, using these compartments called altars. In the parlance, the word, phrase, whatever, to open a back altar is called a trigger. That's mind control parlance. I've been writing about it for 20 years and more, about this whole thing of the trigger that brings the other compartment, the other personality, to the person's conscious mind. They're actually using mind control parlance now in the way that they're talking about what's happening in universities and virtually everywhere else, that people might be triggered. It's very appropriate because they're under forms of mind control, and it's getting more and more extreme. I mean, when you reach the point where the University of Glasgow is giving trigger warnings to theology students that something about the crucifixion might upset them, I mean, where do we go? A lot further, I'll tell you, if we let it happen. This is one or two things on that same theme. Warnings at this university, trigger warnings, are also given to veterinary students who work with dead animals. Well, don't be a vet then. What are you doing studying as a vet? If that's too upsetting for you, do something else. And those studying contemporary society who will be discussing illness and violence. Well, then don't study it. And how do you think you're going to study contemporary society without discussing illness and violence? Students of forensic science at Strathclyde University in Glasgow are given a verbal warning at the beginning of some lectures where sensitive images involving blood patterns, crime scenes and bodies, etc. are in the presentation. Well, if that's too much for you, what are you doing studying forensic science? A trigger warning for a gender studies course at Stirling University says, we cannot anticipate or exclude the possibility that you may encounter material which is triggering, i.e. which can trigger a negative reaction. Ooh, mustn't have them. And we urge that you take all necessary precautions to look after yourself in and around the program. They are teaching people to be victims. They are teaching people to be Generation Jelly. And students are told, you can, of course, leave a class at any time. Children, teenagers, I thought. Little girls and boys. Can I say little girls and boys anymore? I'm not sure I can. Don't give a shit. Students are told, you can, of course, leave a class at any time should you need to, but please check in later that day to let us know how you are. Oh, theology student, are you okay with talking about the crucifixion? Are you all right now? Would you like a pill? Unbelievable. And that mentality is going out now, more and more, year after year, to run the frickin' system. Do you know when I was travelling in Australia last year on the Worldwide Wake Up Speaking tour, came across an article about an Australian school that had banned applause. In case there's anyone in the audience that is sensitive to noise. Now, if anyone wants confirmation of the scale of mind control and perception manipulation that is possible, I rest my case. And so, this psychological fascism, because that's what mind control is, can be seen in the reaction to Trump in America. I'm no supporter of Trump. You know, the whole point I've been making all along is look at a system that gives you a choice between Clinton and Trump. That's where the focus should be. But instead, people really caught in the left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, as if Clinton is left in their perception of left. I mean, oh, God. But the response and the reaction to Trump in its extreme way, where people are saying they need therapy or whatever, is classic mind control. I mean, what's happening with Trump? And I, you know, like I say, I'm no supporter of Trump. He's another expression of the swamp claiming to be draining it. But the way that the response has played out when you observe it, this is people being told how to react, being told to do this, told to do that in response to Trump being president. When, you know, one of the people behind that is a guy called George Soros, who is one of the great manipulators of, for instance, protest. His network was behind the fake Arab Spring, for instance, and now they're doing it in America. And people just go along with it. People on the progressive side, many of whom in the universities are part of this political correct mafia and this safe space, shrinking violet generation jelly. They go on year after year about the corporate media, and you can't believe the media. And now they're allowing the corporate media to dictate their perceptions and dictate their actions. It's pathetic beyond words. And as I've been saying, you know, for decades now, and I mentioned it earlier, you can't control billions of people physically. They're trying to do that more and more with this global surveillance state, but can't do it all. You've got to control their minds and perceptions, and you've got to be able to get them to perceive, believe, and act in a way that suits you. And therefore, when you break that down, the foundation of mass human control not only is, but can only be mind control, perception and emotional control. And we need to take our minds back. Never mind walking down the street waving a banner that's going to change nothing. Take your mind back. Question everything. No matter what the source is, question it. Ask, why do I believe this? Where did my perception of this come from? Where did my perception of that come from? And if you chart it back and follow it back and track it back, you'll invariably find it didn't come from you at all. It was a perception, it was an image, not least through the repetition of the same alleged fact and assumption. And you know, there's another area of this mind control that people completely miss, and that's something called familiarity. Once something enters your concept of the familiar, it becomes then the how things are. And once the familiar becomes the how things are, it's not questioned anymore. It's just accepted. This is how things are. Everyone knows that, mate. We have to start questioning everything, right down to the very foundations of who we are, what life is, what this reality is, and what the game is in terms of what's happening in the world. Question everything. Because if we don't, if we go on having our perceptions externally downloaded to us, then the outcome will be a race of humans that make sheep look spontaneous, mavericks, and fully formed individuals. We are at the crossroads here. We take our minds back, or someone else completely